Welcome to everybody joining us from all over the world. We know that we've got viewers in Lethbridge, and who knows where else. We'll have to hope that people will put in the chat box there where they're watching from. Once again, you are watching Live Chat with James here on ProPix TV, and as I said, a special dual broadcast as we also broadcast out onto Jess FM and Jess TV in Lethbridge, Alberta. Now, today, we're going to take a look at the quiet heart of British Columbia's interior, where a family farm home to nearly 400 ostriches became the unlikely epicenter of an international firestorm. It was a battle that pitted a small farming family against the full might of the Canadian government. But this was more than just a dispute over animal health. It became a flashpoint in a deeply polarized world, raising fundamental questions about scientific authority, individual liberty, and of course the trust we place in our institutions. This is the story of a fight for survival, not just for the birds, but for a way of life. We're going to take a look at a deep dive into both sides of this argument. And some people may not like some of the things that I say, but it's just looking at the facts, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to be fair to both sides of this argument and both sides of the debate. So again, make sure that you understand that we are here to give a non-biased opinion, or not opinion, sorry, but facts of both sides of the equation. At the end of the show, I will wrap it up with a personal op-ed where I will bring up my thoughts on it, my personal opinions, and my personal feelings on it. And that will be at the end of the show. But until that point where I do the op-ed, we are just going to be looking at the facts. So let's take a look here, folks. We know that there are a lot of things that are going around about the farm, about the animals, and it's coming from both sides. It's an information war at best, and at worst, it is the life of 400 majestic and beautiful creatures that hangs in the balance. Now, is it a matter of national safety for our food supply and the risk of course, the H5N1 or the H5N2 and other forms of the avian influenza that go into the supply chain of our food? Is that the big concern, or is it about the overreach of government? The things that we're going to look at today. Now, in terms of my background here, not only as an entertainer, an actor, comedian, and of course talk show host, but I've also studied microbiology with the World Health Organization, looking at the different impacts of virus and zoonotics, and looking at how different viruses spread, not only in the context of animals, but also in humans when we look at pandemics and all of that. Do I agree with all of the science? Well, you know, science is a tricky thing, and it's open to interpretation at times when you look at the numbers. If you're looking at numbers, of course, you want to look at the real numbers, not the ones that are put out from one side or the other. You want to find the true numbers, and of course, that is what is at the end of the day, that's what really matters. All right, folks. So again, as I said before the show started in the little intro there, we're going to play a bit of an overview of tonight's episode. And the reason for that is because I know that some people cannot stay for the full episode. So we will start with that. That'll give you an overview. And that is what we will break down and get into further discussion about tonight. So without further ado, let's get into that audio. And in the background, I will see if I can't just some images as well. Hold on. But we're not getting the audio. Let me just turn that up. We'll just restart the audio once we get. So that's I might be canceling.
Well, we look at quite a situation.
All right, it seems that we have a sound issue here, so that's okay. So we seem to have an audio issue with the overview, so we're just going to get right into the show then, folks. Now we're talking about the sickness, and that's what started December the 24th through January, December 2024 through January of 2025. Now, it was flu-like symptoms at Edgewood, and of course, we know we're talking about the farm. Yes, the Universal Ostrich Farm. Now, they know, of course, that in the past there has been flu-like symptoms, and they were different, very similar in terms of how they presented, but different in terms of the testing results that came out. Now, the story begins as early as December the 20 in 2024. We'll get to the earlier incidents after a bit, but let's take a look here at the most recent and what is at the dispute that is currently being fought out. Now, the Universal Ostrich Farms, a business operated for over 25 years by Karen Esperson and Dave Belinsky, as something was wrong. Yes, a mysterious illness described by the owners as having flu-like symptoms began to spread through their flock. Over a 3-week period between 25 and 30 ostriches died. There are people out there that believe that the number is only 2. I think that what's happening is that there is a bit of confusion in terms of the numbers. Only 2 ostriches were tested, and we'll get into that as well. But just to clarify that number, I've had people reaching out to me online through social media and arguing that it's only 2 birds. Why are we talking about higher numbers? And I think that's where the discussion, where people just got the misinformation or confused information, however you want to put it. But essentially, yes, the 2 was what they tested, and then, of course, we have the much larger number of those birds that were deceased. Now, the owners observed a distinct pattern. The deaths were occurring primarily among the younger birds and those that had been introduced to the farm more recently, after 2020, that is. Now, the older, more established members of the flock appeared entirely unaffected. This observation was not just a passing detail, it was a critical clue that would form the very foundation of the farm's defense. Now, the owners believed they had seen something like this before. There was, though, an anonymous tip, and that is when the CFIA's arrival shot in. Now, of course, we know that there is a big debate about what their program is and whether they've overreached in this particular situation. On December the 28th, 2024, the situation did escalate. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, or CFIA, received an anonymous phone call reporting multiple ostrich deaths at the Edgewood farm. The agency, which is responsible for safeguarding Canada's food supply and animal health, immediately contacted the farm and dispatched inspectors to investigate. Upon arrival, they verbally imposed a quarantine order. This, of course, restricted all movement of animals and materials on and off of the property. The next day, 4 more ostriches passed due to the illness. Now, the nature of the CFIA's arrival, prompted by an outside tip rather than a report from the farm itself, set a confrontational tone from the offset. Now, the agency would later cite the farm's failure to report the deaths as a violation of the Health of Animals Act. Then this requires producers to notify authorities of suspected reportable diseases like avian influenza. Now, the farm, however, the sudden appearance of federal agents felt less like assistance and more like intrusion. Now, let's take a look at the diagnosis and the cull order. And we're just going to kind of keep going, folks, because there's so much information that I want to make sure that gets in there and out to you, as well as making sure that we have time to take some phone calls. And when the phone lines open in about 2 minutes, you can call in at 604-385-5093 and have your say. Now, on December the 30th, the CFIA inspectors, collected samples from 2 of the dead ostriches. And I think that's where people are getting that 2 number from. Instead of performing a full autopsy, they took only oral and rectal swabs. And those were taken from the carcasses and sent them off for testing. Now, when the results came back, of course, that was with stunning speed. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, the BC Animal Health Centre reported that the samples had tested positive for the H5 avian influenza. This was based on a PCR, and that's also known as a polymerase chain reaction. Now, the finding was later confirmed to be the highly pathogenic H5N1 strain. The CFIA's response was immediate and decisive, citing its own authority under Section 48, subsection 1 of the Federal Health of Animals Act. The agency issued a cull order for the entire herd, every one of the approximately 400 ostriches. Now, the deadline for the complete depopulation and disposal of the birds was set for February the 1st, 2025. In the eyes of the regulator, the case was closed. For the farm, the fight had just begun. Of course, we know that this has been going on in terms of back and forth. So the farm owners, where did it start? Well, the animals deserve the right to live. And that was the argument that Katie Pasney had. And she also stated that they should not be slaughtered. Now, the farm's owners immediately challenged, sorry, folks, the scientific basis of the cull order. They argued that the decision of such magnitude, the complete destruction of their life's work, was being completely made on the basis of two simple swabs from carcasses that had been dead for over 24 hours. They contended that the gold standard for diagnosis required more rigorous methods, a full necropsy, and tissue sampling, which could definitively identify the cause of death. Their skepticism was rooted in the recent history. And yes, this is where we look back at 2020. Now, the farm had experienced another outbreak of illness with similar respiratory symptoms. In that instance, a veterinarian conducted a full autopsy and used tissue samples to identify the culprit, not as a virus, but as a bacterial infection. Now, this is commonly found in soil and water in terms of this particular strain. Now, this prior event became a crucial pillar of their argument. It established a precedent of procedure, allowing them to frame the CFIA's current actions not as scientific disagreement, but as a departure from a more thorough and reliable method that had been used on their own farm before. They were not merely claiming the CFIA was wrong. They were arguing the agency was being inconsistent and scientifically careless. The farm requested that the CFIA conduct proper tissue sampling to rule out other bacterial causes. Now, the agency refused. They also denied the farm's request to test any of the healthy living birds or to sample the farm's water and food supplies. This refusal to gather more data would become a central grievance, fueling a narrative of bureaucracy, more interested in following rigid protocols than in pursuing scientific truth. Of course, that is a really tough thing to take if you are the farm owner and you are the owner of these 400 beautiful creatures. If you want to have your say, folks, of course, you can call in 604-385-5093. Once again, 604-385-5093. Now, with the February 1st deadline looming, the Universal Ostrich Farm has shifted its battle from the pasture to the courthouse. Between January 4th and 9th, they formally applied to the CFIA for an exemption from the cull order, arguing that their flock possessed rare and valuable genetics. And those genetics were worthy of preservation. The farm had, since 2020, pivoted its business model away from meat production and towards scientific research, focusing on unique antibodies found inside of the ostrich eggs. Now, on January the 10th, the CFIA denied the exemption, stating that the farm had failed to submit sufficient evidence to support its claim of genetic rarity. Compounding the farm's frustration, the agency also reversed a preliminary decision that had qualified the herd as a distinct unit, a designation that might have opened the door to alternatives like vaccination or extended quarantine instead of a full cull. Now, by January the 15th, the farm reported its last ostrich death, bringing the total toll to 69 birds, with nearly 400 survivors who now appeared perfectly healthy. Facing the imminent destruction of their herd, the owners filed for an emergency injunction in federal court. On January the 31st, in a major early victory for the farm, Justice Michael Batista went on to grant a stay of the cull order. The court found that the case raised two serious legal questions: whether the CFIA had acted reasonably in ordering a cull instead of considering alternatives, and whether the federal order infringed on provincial jurisdiction. Now, the ostriches had been granted a temporary reprieve. Now, excuse me. Excuse me. Now, the CFIA's legal position was anchored in a long-standing and internationally recognized disease control strategy known as the stamping out policy. Now, this policy mandates the humane depopulation of all birds on an infected premises and, of course, to rapidly eliminate the virus and to prevent its spread. The agency argued this aggressive approach was essential to protect Canada's $6.8 billion domestic poultry industry and its $1.75 billion in annual exports. Likelihood that they would not budge on their stand. Also, when you look at the livelihoods that depend on maintaining the country's disease-free status in the international markets, it became even a bigger issue. Now, as the legal battle intensified, the CFIA's public justification began to evolve from a procedural argument to a much more urgent public health warning. The agency revealed the results of a full genome sequencing of the virus conducted at its high-security National Center for Foreign Animal Disease in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Now, this analysis determined that the H5N1 strain found at the farm was a novel reassortment not seen elsewhere in Canada, according to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Now, they claim that this new strain contained a specific genetic marker, the D1.3 genotype, which had previously associated with a human infection in a poultry worker in Ohio. Further laboratory tests on mice revealed this novel version had enhanced the pathogenicity. Now, its ability to cause disease, that's what that breaks down to. Even minimal qualities of the virus proved lethal to mice in just 4 to 5 days, and that's significantly more virulent outcome than produced by the H5N1 strain found in the U.S. dairy cattle. The CFIA, of course, turned around now and had a powerful argument. Allowing this particular flock to survive would mean preserving a living reservoir for a uniquely dangerous and potentially mutating virus, posing an unacceptable risk both to animal and to human health. When you look at the other researchers and the information, the farm's legal team countered that the CFIA's stamping out policy was an outdated, blunt instrument being misapplied to a unique situation. Their central argument was that surviving flock have gone without a single death since mid-January, and they had developed a natural herd immunity. Far from being a threat, they argued, these birds were now priceless scientific asset that should be studied and not destroyed. Now, I know that there have been a lot of people that have reached out to support that theory. Now, to bolster this claim, they highlighted their ongoing research collaborations, particularly with Dr. Yasuhiro Tsukamoto. And I apologize, I probably butchered that Japanese name, but he is the president of Kyoto Prefectural University in Japan. Now, the doctor is a leading researcher in the field of ostrich immunology, pioneering methods to extract powerful antibodies from ostrich eggs to combat a range of pathogens from influenza to COVID-19. The farm argued that their ostriches, now potentially carrying antibodies to a novel H5N1 strain, represented a unique opportunity for groundbreaking research. The firm's core legal demand remained simple: retest the living birds to prove that they were no longer shedding the virus. But the CFIA steadfastly refused, stating in court documents that its policy does not provide for additional testing once an infection is confirmed. Furthermore, the farm's owners were told they were prohibited from conducting their own independent tests under threat of severe penalties, including up to 6 months in jail and fines of $200,000 per bird tested. Now, this refusal became a powerful symbol in the public narrative, portraying the agency as dogmatic and fearful of any evidence that might contradict its initial decision. Despite the farm's passionate arguments, the Canadian legal system consistently sided with the regulator. On May the 13th, 2025, the federal government, the federal court dismissed the farm's application for judicial review, with the judge ruling that the CFIA's decisions were reasonable and made in a procedurally fair manner. This ruling was unanimously upheld by the Federal Court of Appeal on August the 21st. The court's reasoning revealed a fundamental principle of Canadian administrative law. And what that is something called judicial difference. Now, the judges repeatedly stated that this is not the role of the court to second guess the scientific decisions of an expert agency like the CFIA, or to become an arbiter of truth on matters of immunology and public health. As long as the CFIA was acting within the authority granted to it by the Parliament under the Health of Animals Act, the courts were bound to respect its expertise. The farm's attempt to introduce new evidence about the flock's current healthy state were deemed inadmissible, and we'll go over that in a few minutes, folks. But as a judicial review is limited to the information the decision maker had at the time the decision was made. And that is a tough one because the courts cannot accept new information that has been gathered or submitted after that initial date. And that is, of course, going back to December of 2024. Now, the farm was losing not because the courts necessarily agreed with the CFIA's science, but because they affirmed the CFIA's legal right to make that scientific determination. And I hope that you can understand the difference there, folks. And if not, just let me know in the chat or, whatever, call in, whatever the case is, and I can explain it in the different terms. Now, this is clearly a tyrannical overreach from the government, is what one supporter had stated. As the legal battle wore on, the conflict spilled out of the courtroom and onto the public square. The universal ostrich farm became a potent symbol for a growing movement skeptical of government authority. In May, the farm hosted the Ostrich Fest, a combination of music festival and protests that drew hundreds of supporters. On a second concert date in July, it featured Tamara Litch, a key organizer of the 2022 Freedom Convoy protest in Ottawa. The cause of the ostriches was quickly and effectively fused with the ideology of the convoy movement. For these supporters, many of whom had protested COVID-19 mandates, the CFIA's actions were another example of government overreach, flawed science, and the violation of individual rights and private property. The farm, in turn, gained a dedicated and highly motivated base of supporters who were adept at organizing and amplifying their message. This symbiotic relationship transformed a local agricultural dispute into a national political event, making quiet, negotiated resolution all but impossible. Now let's turn our eyes and see where the American intervention and the Trump administration with his allies came into play here. Of course, we know we're talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Mehmet Oz, among others, including billionaire John. I'm going to probably pronounce this wrong, and I apologize, John, but it's Katsimatidis. And I apologize. I probably just butchered that and insulted you, but my apologies. In any event, the cause soon crossed the border, attracting the attention of high-profile political figures in the United States, many of them connected to the Trump administration. On May the 23rd, the U.S. Health Secretary, yes, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., wrote to the CFIA president, urging him to spare the birds for scientific study. Kennedy, a prominent skeptic of vaccines and government health agencies, saw the case as another front in his broader campaign. He was joined by Dr. Mehmet Oz, the former television personality appointed by Donald Trump to serve as senior health administration role. Dr. Oz made a dramatic offer to relocate the entire flock of 400 ostriches to his 900-acre ranch in Florida. The farm, wanting to keep the birds in Canada, politely declined the offer. Now, the American intervention was not just rhetorical. The New York billionaire John Katsimatidis, and I probably butchered it again, but anyway, he is a vocal supporter and a friend of Donald Trump, announced he was helping to fund the farm's legal fight. He contributed approximately $35,000 US and claimed that President Trump himself was very aware of the case. International pressure campaign further elevated the farm's profile, basically framing the dispute as a global story of individual freedom against state control. Very in-depth, very charged, and a lot of different angles being played to try and get to a resolution here, but it is not one of ease by anybody. At the heart of the public campaign was farm spokesperson Katie Pasitny, and she was masterfully using social media to build a global following. Through frequent, emotional Facebook Live broadcasts, she gave supporters raw, real-time view of the family's struggle, galvanizing support and directing their actions. But this online activism has a dark side. Pasitny posted the names and phone numbers of local businesses, from hotels to gas stations to waste management companies, that were suspected of providing services to the CFIA for the impending cull. This led to a coordinated campaign of harassment. Businesses were review bombed online and inundated with threatening calls and emails. The RCMP confirmed they were investigating multiple complaints of threats. This went on. They were threats of intimidation and harassment, including in one case death threats and threats of gun violence against the company's employees and their families. Some of the businesses targeted, like Nucor Environmental Solutions, publicly stated they had no involvement whatsoever with the farm, while Pasitny stated she did not condone threats. The campaign she initiated had spiraled out of control, dividing the local community and harming uninvolved third parties. So again, with the best of intentions, it shows how things can still get out of control. As we look now to September, this month of 2025, the farm was running out of legal options. On September the 12th, the Federal Court of Appeal delivered another blow, denying the farm's request for a stay of the cull order while it prepared an application to the Supreme Court of Canada. In a blunt assessment, Judge Gerald Heckman ruled that the farm's proposed appeal did not raise a serious or arguable issue, and that the CFIA must be allowed to discharge the mandate conferred on it by Parliament. Now, the end seemed inevitable. In the early morning hours of Monday, September the 22nd, the government's enforcement operation began. A convoy of RCMP vehicles and waste disposal trucks converged on the farm. They also, executed the search warrant, with the RCMP's stated role being to keep the peace and enforce the law. While the agency conducted its business, after 9 months of fighting, the state had arrived to end it. There was a tense standoff when it came to the final act of defiance, where Karen Esperson and Katie Passitney refused to leave the ostrich enclosure, spending the night with their birds. The standoff came to a head on the morning of September the 23rd after repeated warnings. RCMP officers entered the pen and arrested both women for obstruction of the CFIA agents under the Health of Animals Act. They were processed and later released, but barred from re-entering the enclosure. The tension at the farm was palpable, escalating into chaos in the pre-dawn hours of September the 24th, and I happened to be out there overnight of the 23rd to 24th. A suspicious fire broke out, engulfing a large roll of hay bales that the CFIA had erected to contain the ostriches in preparation for the cull. Firefighters rushed to the scene to battle the blaze, which police began investigating as possible arson. It is also important to state that, fortunately, the fire hall, or the fire truck at least, was parked at the end of the road where the farm is. So again, very close proximity. It could have been much worse and much different had that fire truck not have been so close. So great job on those who responded to keep it under control and not let it get crazy. Now, Katie, of course, stated that we've been granted an interim stay by the Supreme Court of Canada. The animals are not dying today, and she was shouting, as well as others, as soon as that announcement was made by Katie. The entire group of volunteers and supporters broke out in cheer, elation, some of them in tears, some of them just, out and out crying. They just were overwhelmed with emotion. And that is, or was, an incredible sight to see, just the pure emotion and the connected hearts that came together there. Now, this just hours away from the cull, the seemingly impossible did happen. On the 24th, as I said, news arrived that the Supreme Court of Canada had granted an 11th hour interim stay of the cull order. The execution was halted pending the High Court's decision on whether it would even hear the farm's full appeal. I want to add another one there, that there is a group there that is very much dedicated to their faith. And they had done a large prayer circle with about 30 volunteers and supporters and others. And it was just within moments after the end of that prayer that the phone rang with the good news that the stay of the cull order was in place from the High Court. So again, divine intervention or just miraculous timing, however you want to put it, it was something to experience. Now, the terms of the stay created a deeply ironic and paradoxical situation, folks. The court ordered that the CFIA was to maintain full custody of the farm and the ostriches. The very agency that had spent 9 months and immense resources seeking to destroy the birds was now legally responsible for their daily care and essentially became their babysitters and responsible for the well-being of every bird there. Now, the order was a practical necessity. The court could not entrust the care of quarantined animals to owners who had just been arrested for obstruction. But it created a surreal new reality on the ground. The CFIA agents in biohazard suits who had arrived with disposal trucks were now tasked with providing food, water, and veterinary oversight to the flock they had condemned. Now, the villains of the farm's narrative had become the reluctant zookeepers. There's an ironic twist to that somewhere, I'm sure. Now, the ostriches of Edgewood live on for now. They are fed and cared for by the same government agency that is legally bound to destroy them. The farm remains under siege, a symbol of a deep and growing divide in how we view science. This is also an impact on how we, or a statement on how we view authority and the role of the state. The Supreme Court's intervention has brought an uneasy truce. But the battle for a universal ostrich farm is far from over. Its final outcome, whenever it may come, will resonate far beyond the small town in British Columbia, shaping the delicate and often contested line between public safety and private rights for years to come. Now, that is a tough source to, or tough one to take for many people because they are a beautiful bird. And I'm going to play or show a few videos, just quick clips of the celebration, the elation, and hopefully the audio will come through on these videos for you, ladies and gentlemen. We need to hope that they do. If you want to phone in, the phone lines are open at 604-385-5093. Once again, area code 604-385-5093. Call in and have your say on this subject tonight as we have this special edition of Live Chat with James. As we continue on here, we'll get a couple of images and videos because I found that it was just a magnificent. I've seen ostriches before, but to spend a bit of time actually right there, face to face with them, really looking into their eyes with their cute little eyelashes and their human-like eyeballs. I mean, you can't help but to love the little guys. Well, and I shouldn't say little because they are not so little, ladies and gentlemen. They are quite large. Some of them can grow up to 9.2 feet tall. So, yeah, they are far from little animals. Let's go back here, though, so I can share my screen and show you some images and some video clips from the day of the cull that was supposed to happen. Look at this guy. This guy here just loved being on camera. He thought it was the best thing ever. So let me just move this over so we can actually show you more of these. There he is. You can see the eyes of them, folks. I mean, just beautiful eyes. And the way that their heads just stay level. Their necks do all the moving enough. Their heads stay level. And something else I learned actually is apparently the ostrich's eye is bigger than their brain, I've heard. These majestic animals, as I said, can grow up to 9.2 feet tall. They can weigh in at over 250 pounds, and they can reach speeds of 40 miles an hour. I mean, the speed is just amazing. And you don't want to piss them off because they can use those feet to kick you in the ass if you get in their way. So keep that in mind. But they're just such beautiful birds. And what I found amazing is that prior to the announcement of the stay of the cull order, birds were further back and away. They weren't really that close. You had one of the males that kept pacing the fence, watching everybody. I'll show you a picture of him in a while. But he just kept pacing the fence and watching the crowd outside, and was, very stressed. You could tell that they were all stressed. But somehow it's like they understood when that phone call came in that announced the stay of the cull order. People were jubilant, but the ostriches, I swear that they understood what was going on. They seemed to relax. And it's almost as though they were smiling and at peace, going, we get to survive another day. And it was just an amazing experience to be there for that. And that's, just a personal part of, the experience in itself, and explaining to you what the mood was there on that particular day and that time. Don't forget, folks, the chat room is open, so you can feel free to leave your comments. And you can always call in on the phone line at 604-385-5093 to have your say on what you think about this whole situation. Let's take a look at a video of the crowd and the emotion after the announcement was made. So yeah, you can see the emotion that was just pouring through the crowd there, and we can take a look at another one here, another video that was just moments after the cull order was stayed as well. So we'll take a look at that one next here. And a lot of hugging, a lot of cheering, a lot of celebration, a lot of smiles, of course, without a doubt. And of course, as I said, the amazing birds, they seem to know what was going on. It's almost like they could tell through the change of the aura or the environment of the audience or the supporters and the humans around. They just really seemed to understand that they were going to be okay for at least a little longer and hopefully a lot longer. But in that regard, they seemed to understand it. It was pretty amazing. So. See how tall they are. I mean, this guy here was probably about 6 feet, and this is the male that I was talking about earlier that kept pacing the line there. And you see that none of the other ostriches are around right now. They're not near this fence. You can see the RCMP vehicles in the background there. They were behind the police line, and these guys here, they kind of every once in a while they'll stop and they'll actually try to eat the police line. The police tape there, it was pretty funny when they're trying to eat it. But yeah, I think that's their way of putting their opinion forward. But my concern, of course, is if they're ingesting the plastic. I'm sure it's not healthy for them. So again, just a big challenge that's going on. It is far from over. But let's take a look at Katie speaking to Global TV. Prior to the actual announcement. So this was a bit earlier, before the announcement was made, before she got that ever important phone call.
Treated like we are criminals, and this is but yet we can't test one animal, not one animal on this farm that loses its life, that is living here 253 days healthy today. They're going to lose their life due to the Canadian inspection agency's flawed and failures in their system of their policy, broken policy. This is broken policy, and the unwillingness to work with Canadians is what's led us here.
Because you want to test them to show that they are not sick and to save them, essentially.
We want to test their health. Maybe we should test before we kill. Stamping out is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and it definitely doesn't fit here at Universal Ostrich Farms, and it hasn't fit for 9 months. All we've been asking is to test. We've had the collaboration offer of the United States with the FDA and the NIH to offer to pay for the testing themselves because they see the rare opportunity here for humanity, what this could do on a global scale. And this is wrong. And then now internationally, the world is watching. The world knows what is happening here with our organization, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. This is life versus death. This is right from wrong. This is what we teach our kids from day one, right from wrong. And this is wrong. And I'm grateful for everybody around the world that is stepping up to see that change has to start to happen. We said we're ground zero for change, and we're not going to stop until it's made.
Do you know if the Supreme Court is going to take on this case?
I have no idea. But you know what? We have international interest, large international interest with the Trump administration, and I sure hope that the Supreme Court would see some value and have some respect for that. If another country can see what we have the potential for here, and they want to offer it to the world as opportunity, for their children, their grandchildren, a better way than the reliance on vaccinations only, to have a more therapeutic, sustainable way to treat viruses and disease in the future. But we're going to eradicate it. We'll destroy it before we discover it. We're dealing with, speculation over science. I keep saying that. And we're losing our rights.
Because you want to test because you want to see if they have antibodies that could protect others.
They have antibodies. This has been proven within our expert witness reports that they had not, we weren't allowed to submit it to court. These expert witness reports should have never had to just go through the court process. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency should have been looking at these expert witness reports as actual material to see why these animals survived. How are they living with supposedly the biggest virulent threat of avian influenza in Canada? Maybe they should be held heroes, and maybe we should use them as an opportunity to discover a remedy. Because how did they do it? If they did it, then we should explore that option. These animals, in my eyes, the minute they came out with that statement, became more valuable, because then that's how we should be looking at them and say, how are they living with the most virulent case of avian influenza? But again, we have RCMP that have breached all quarantine boundaries. They've been in their own clothes. They're traveling between here, Vernon. They're going into hotels, and they're at quarantine zones. We've had a hazmat suit worn by one of them in the quarantine zone, arresting us. And then he left the quarantine zone with it to where we were detained. And then we had to bring it up and go, "You're still in your hazmat suit." And then he quickly got out of it. But then at the time, they're still handling materials. So with his gloves on, then they're allowing me and my mom that just came from the really infected area to then get out of the car, be everywhere, and use their personal cell phones to call our lawyer with our hands. So you tell me how we have the most virulent strain, but yet we have no outbreak response.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to say?
Thank you. Thank you to everybody that is here, the supporters, the support that keeps pouring in for our family from all across the world, that just knows they see what we're fighting for. There's a better way. We need to protect our small farms across Canada due to broken policy that Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
Okay, so yeah, as you can see, it was quite the emotional speech that she had given, and and she explained a lot of the side points that that they were looking at. Now, I really want to make sure that it's clearly understood that the reason why the courts could not look at the different reports that were issued by the farm and the owners was because they can only take into account what happened and the process that went up to the actual order for the cull. They have to ensure that every step was taken according to regulation, policy, and Canadian law. Excuse me. And then they can look at how it was handled with the appeal for the application for the special designation. So those are the very, very strict parameters that the Canadian court could look at. So they weren't able to go outside of that to look at scientific reports. That was outside of the purview of the court, and that is why it continues to weave its way through the courts, because it's a very delicate but also a very convoluted and complicated situation. As you can see on the screen there, folks, there are just so many different angles that we looked at when it came to these beautiful birds. But really, this is what's at the heart of the matter. Are these a business asset? Are they a business, inventory, or are they pets? Are they, there's just so many questions there. But that is where the definition is really blurred. There is one side claiming that it is a family farm, that it is non-commercial, that it is non-producing in terms of meat or other consumables by the public. And on the other hand, they are a company that also has another company that manufactures certain skin lotions and other items, such as creams that they promote to use on burns or open cuts, different things like that. Now, those sales are still ongoing on the website. You can actually actively place orders online. I don't know if you can actually get the product, but I know that you can place the orders and pay for it online. And of course, this would be a concern because we don't know when these oils, these ostrich oils, were extracted, at what point, and whether or not they came from potentially exposed or infected birds. So again, it's looking at it from a standpoint that if you are making revenue off of the birds, then it becomes a commercial property or a commercial farming, a commercial venture. So it's very difficult without having a conversation with Katie to really understand the dynamics of how the setup is there, because they just seem so genuine in terms of their compassion and their dedication to their birds that it's really inspiring in that regard. But at the same time, I think that it's important that the public have a clear understanding and a clear concept of exactly what it is. Now, they're saying that it's a non-food producing farm. It is, or not human consumption. I don't know if that means that they are using it for pet foods or anything else, but I know that for human consumption, they say that they are no longer doing that. But then you have other products such as the leather from the birds. You have the eggs, which are very valuable, not only to the scientific world, but just in terms of the consumables. So as I said, we have some information here. So let's take a look at the value in terms of looking at the birds and the eggs. The maximum compensation that the government will pay for each bird, the maximum, it's not saying that's what they'll get, but it is $3,000 per bird. Now, let's look at what the actual values are. Now, the chicks from 30 to 60 days, and I'm giving these numbers in US dollars because this is according to one of the websites, ostrichgrowers.com. So their chicks are worth about $525. After 90 days, that goes up to about $1,200 US. And then after they reach the yearlings stage, they can be valued at about $2,500 per bird US. As adults, though, that's where the big jump is. They actually climb in value the older they get. So the adults are worth approximately $7,500 to $10,000 each. So you can understand why they look at the valuation that the government is looking at a maximum compensation, is very low. Now let's take a look at a few other facts about them. Now the eggs, as I said, are massive. They are the equivalent of about 24 chicken eggs. Just one ostrich egg has that equivalency. Now, they are about $35 to $50 US each for those eggs. And this is according to the American Ostrich Association. And they have the equivalent, as I said, of 24 chicken eggs and they can lay 40 to 60 eggs a year on average. They can lay eggs for approximately 30 years of their lifespan. So you can just imagine the revenue there. Now, fertile eggs can sell for as much as $100 per egg. Again, US dollars. So it just shows some of the value extracted there. Now, you also can consider the leather, as I said, just the other products there. You can look at the scientific advancements that can be used in the studies and what the value is in the intrinsic studies that can be done, as we were talking about at Kyoto University in Japan. And also, of course, we also touched on the skincare products that are being sold by the owner's other company, Anu. That's it, Anu Skincare. So again, where is that ostrich oil coming from for those products that are still being sold online? We'll have to watch and see how see what that breaks down as. But here, as you can see, folks, it's also about the money that taxpayers are on the hook for. Right here in this one image alone, you've got 5 police vehicles, and they have police officers. I believe it was an average of 2 per vehicle. And this is just a small percentage of the number of officers and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency numbers that were on site. So it just expanded and expanded. So now you've got all of these officers there. You have a 24-hour surveillance system. You have the Canadian Food Inspection Agency workers actually now caring for the birds, feeding them, giving them water, making sure that they're looked after with veterinarians and so forth. So this is money that's coming out of other areas. There was one officer there who allegedly or apparently says that he normally does child abduction or missing children cases. And instead, he's there to guard these birds. So again, it seems like an overextension of resources to this one issue. Could it be that there are threats? Well, it could be, and we'll talk about that in just a moment as well, because there was allegedly threats against one of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency workers, and as such, they actually sent police to pick up his wife and his children that they were under escort, and then the police stayed outside of the individual's home to guard and make sure the safety of his wife and children were taken care of. So again, that safety was important. You can see it with the different open areas. So here again are the police back there in that area. I don't know if you can see. I'm going to pull up a photo here for you folks, and hopefully you can see my mouse when I do that so you can understand the layout here. There we go. Okay, so over in the area where you see the cars parked, that's the police line there of about 5 or 6 vehicles in that area at that point. You have the police tape here cordoning that section off. Here you have a big stuffed animal. It's an ostrich, and I guess that he's looking for the route to freedom and safety. I guess he's in the truck and ready for his friends to jump aboard as they make their great escape. But again, it just shows with all the signage and just all of the support of the community and people that traveled from Alberta and other parts of Canada just to be there to show their support and to give that give of themselves to volunteers. So there we go, folks. Let's wrap this up then. Since we are not getting a lot of calls on the line, there's no point in dragging that part out. But I'm going to bring up a screen of the entrance where they had the names of some of the prominent figures that were supporting the farm and the events going on as we go to my op-ed. Now, as I said, this now is the part where I get to speak my personal opinions and my observations as an individual as opposed to a journalist. Being there, as I said earlier, to be able to look into the eyes of these beautiful creatures was something magnificent and really enjoyable. However, of course, we know that there is a potential threat to the Canadian food system, that there is a threat to the wild population of birds, that there is a threat to the weasels and other animals that are in the region. We know that that it also threatens the Canadian economy when it comes to the over $6 billion a year in poultry business done within Canada, and another 1.8 approximately billion dollars that we export around the globe. I understand that both sides of the argument, and I have definitely got empathy for both. I understand the importance of being vigilant to ensure that their food supply remains safe. I know that it's important for us to ensure that Canadians and those visiting that region are safe. We don't want to see this illness getting into the water systems. We don't want to see it spreading far and wide. With the ability for other animals to come into the farm's property and out, then of course we know that this could be where they are getting the H5N1 from. However, with that said, some people very clearly pointed out that police officers were in quarantined areas without any personal protection gear on. There was other times where officers that did wear personal protection gear actually wore it back to the police station or to their temporary station. I'm not sure which of the two it was. But regardless, they went back and they did not change out of it, which means that they were still contaminated. Now, as you see on the table, you've got Alex Jones, Kid Carson, No New Normal, Dr. Oz, David Creighton, Vancouver Film, John C. I'm sorry, John, I would butcher your name again. I do apologize. Redacted, Life Site News, Dr. Daniel Nicase, I believe that is, or maybe it's Nagas. Ezra Wellness, Maria Z, Viva, and I'm not sure, I can't see what the other part of that was, but Rebel News, Krisky, President Trump, and others. So it just shows the magnitude of the people that are supporting this cause. And of course, you know, when you look at any creature being destroyed, you know, and put down, it's just a sad day when we have to resort to that. As I said, we did have the phone lines open, ladies and gentlemen. We didn't really get any inquiries or anybody wanting to reach out and talk to us, so we will leave it at that. I hope that in the long term that the birds can be tested. I think that there's a high value in testing the birds to find out if they have developed some type of immunity. On the other side, of course, there is the concern that the virus could just be carrying on throughout the flock. They could be asymptomatic. It doesn't mean that they are not sick. It doesn't mean that they don't have the H5N1 virus. What it does mean is they are not showing symptoms. They appear healthy. But again, it is very tough to say without the proper testing, and I think that goes a long way. The courts, unfortunately, have their hands tied when it comes to new evidence and evidentiary requests or submissions. It should also be noted that it was brought up in court, and some of the specialists or these so-called professionals that were submitting information, of course, were debunked, and they were proven to have come up with false submissions in the past, allegedly, or been unreliable witnesses in court. So again, that becomes a very important issue at hand. So with that, we also know that there was allegedly failure to report the original illnesses, and only through a whistleblower did the CFIA get involved. This, of course, makes us worry that they may not be as forthcoming when it comes to any future outbreaks, and they may just be more careful about how they dispose of bodies. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we also know that they potentially had an outbreak in 2020 that was unconfirmed and untested for. That we can't really blame the farmers for, because there was not the requirement to test at that time for the H5N1. This is not an oversight. It just was not at that point that people needed to test for it in terms of the scientific value or the scientific risks. So, In conclusion, I really think that they should test all the birds, find out which ones are healthy, which ones are not carriers, and make sure that they are not bringing forward a new, more virulent strain of the H5N1, H5N2, or otherwise. It's important to understand that even though they, as I said, can appear to be healthy, that they could be just asymptomatic, meaning that they could be still carrying and passing it on. That is why the rigorous testing should take place. If they do, in fact, have a herd immunity, that could be globally changing. That could change the world because at this point, billions of dollars are being spent by nations around the world every year on the avian influenza and compensation for those losses. There's also billions of dollars being spent by insurance companies to pay out the premiums or pay out the claims on these events as well for those farms that carry the insurance. This is together costing billions of dollars to the global economy. Not to mention the other items that, of course, have seen spikes in costs. This was one of the main driving factors of the egg shortage in the United States of America and the high egg prices. That was as a result of so many culls being needed to be carried out throughout the United States, causing a shortage of those hens that are laying eggs. Further to that, of course, we need to also recognize that these individuals have been fighting hard. They have a lot of support. And of course, they are essentially like a family. You heard Katie in one part of the video where she was naming off some of the ostriches by their given names. It's a sad day, ladies and gentlemen, when the world is pitted against each other, or at least Canadians. We like to do what's right. We like to help each other, but we also understand that we have a bigger responsibility to our community and to each other. We need to come together with grace, dignity, and of course, respect. We need to love thy neighbor. We need to ensure that we take care to not infect others, to cause sickness, harm, or any type of suffering. That message seems to be lost on the division and the polarization of our country, of our citizenship, and of the global community. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that one thing that can come out of this, besides healthy birds, is, of course, a sense of unity. If we can come together, like these ostriches, and instead not bury our head in the sand, but open up our wings to hugs. I thank you for tuning in to this episode of Live Chat with James on ProPix TV, and as a special treat, also broadcasted on Jess FM and Jess TV tonight. Leave your comments in the comment section, ladies and gentlemen. I would love to know your thoughts on this subject. I would also love to know where you're watching it from, even if you are just watching the rebroadcast. Be a part of it. Leave your comments. And again, be happy, be careful, be safe, and most of all, be loving. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.